You've heard of Transformers, right? Of course you have. You know who Bumblebee is, yeah? Yeah, probably the second most famous Transformer ever. Yeah. So this is going to be a video about trademarks. So I'm going to try and chuck in a couple of gags to stop things getting too dry. There are tons of stories out there of companies fighting it out over the rights to a specific character's name or a specific trademark. And sometimes these stories, they don't even have a very neat ending. I mean, this stuff is hard enough if you're like an actual IP lawyer. I'm certainly not that. My law degree comes from the University of Googling stuff to confirm my own biases. But today I'm going to do my best to try and tell you a pretty funny story about the time Hasbro lost the name of arguably the most important character in their entire stable. Back in the 1980s, it was extremely uncommon for a toy's popularity to last longer than a year or two. The general consensus was that kids would be into a thing, but then they'd grow 1 year older, they wouldn't like that thing anymore, and then they'd move on. Hasbro never stopped making Transformers after 1984, but year after year, they came up with new character names, new ideas. Beast Wars, for instance, consisted of almost completely unique character names. Even Optimus Prime was turned into Optimus Primal. There really was no value in paying to trademark a character who would be on the shelves for a few months and then would be forgotten forever. The general attitude was, no one's going to care about these characters in 6 months, so just save your money, mate. So yeah, they might have trademarked your He-Mans, your Lion-O's, your Optimus Primes, that makes business sense, but Ram Man, Safari Joe, Pipes? It's just that the world wasn't ready for just how nostalgic adult men were about to become. The early 2000s saw tons of 80s properties getting updated for modern audiences. Turtles, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, He-Man, and all of this is before any of the big Hollywood films proved just how lucrative nostalgia could be. And when Hasbro went about rebooting Transformers, which they did in 2003, they wanted to make sure that they still owned all the names of all the classic characters, like your Optimus Primes, your Megatron, Starscream, and all that lot. But it turns out in all those years of inactivity that Bumblebee's name had been taken by another company. For a swing, of all things. Despite their best attempts, Hasbro could not prove that they owned the name of Bumblebee because it had been literally years since they released a toy with that name. So to fill the gap of the plucky little yellow sidekick, they just created a brand new character called Hotshot. But don't worry mate, the story doesn't end there. There are many more twists in this tale. It probably wasn't that big a deal not to have Bumblebee in Transformers Armada, but at this point Hasbro knew that they had a big live-action Transformers film on the horizon. This film was categorically going to cater to nostalgic adults who remembered all the toys from the 80s. And as you know, in the film they positioned Bumblebee to be like the big Transformers figurehead character, so they needed to get that Bumblebee trademark back. In a very short period of time, this had gone from really being a bit of a non-issue really, to potentially changing the way all companies approach trademark forever. I'm sure you're asking, how exactly did this happen? And in order to explain this, I probably need to talk a little bit about trademarks, and this is a massive subject which I'm massively underqualified to talk about, but here are the basics as I understand them. 1. You cannot trademark a term which is considered generic. 2. You can only own the trademark for your specific trade. And 3. You have to prove that you are defending your trademark in order to keep it. So on the first point, you're probably aware, you can't trademark the word the, but more specifically than that, you cannot trademark the term action figure. That's way too generic. You can, however, trademark ultra action figures. An interesting side note to this is that companies will go out of their way to prevent their trademarks from becoming generic. Transformers toys, for instance, don't use the term transform anywhere on the packaging. Instead, they use words like change or convert. This is because if the term transform became a generic verb for a toy that turns from one thing into another, then it would actually be harder for Hasbro to enforce that they own the trademark Transformers. Case in point here, a toy of a Bumblebee called Bumblebee would be too generic to trademark. On that second point, Hasbro could only own the Bumblebee trademark for toys. There are tons of things that are trademarked as Bumblebee that aren't toys, that are owned by all kinds of other people, and that's fine, because you're unlikely to confuse Bumblebee medical products for Bumblebee the transforming car. The problem is that not defending your trademark is probably the single thing that weakens it the most. So it's not just that Hasbro didn't release a Bumblebee Transformer for a huge period of time, it's that they didn't release any Bumblebee toy after about 1995. So when somebody swoops in and says they want to trademark the term Bumblebee, yeah, no problem, mate. So once you've lost a trademark, how do you get it back? Because obviously the story doesn't end there. We all know that Bumblebee's massive. Well, Hasbro were pretty f***ing sneaky, actually. In 2001, they released some key rings of all of the original tiny little Minibot toys, including Bumblebee. They're actually really cool. I had a couple of these. They transform and everything. Now, this is an actual transforming toy of Bumblebee, which they trademarked. They can trademark that because technically a key ring isn't a toy. In 2002, a little Bumblebee figure was released by Hasbro, but they didn't assert the trademark. They were quite clever here. They can associate the name with toys, but they left off the trademark because they knew they weren't quite in a position to defend it. Then in 2004, Hasbro licensed a Hard Hero Bumblebee statue, which of course they could trademark because a statue isn't a toy. So you can see what Hasbro are doing here. They're circling the toy category, getting the name associated with figures, miniatures, key rings, things that are ancillary or what's the word I'm looking for, or peripheral to toys, because they can't quite enforce the toy one just yet. But this makes their claim to contest that swing's trademark that much easier. They continued doing this for a couple more years, and I'm sure it's no coincidence, but Playmore, who owned the Bumblebee swing trademark, decided not to renew their Bumblebee trademark on that swing. And wouldn't you know it, in 2006, Hasbro released the very first trademarked Bumblebee toy in 11 years. By the summer of 2007, the Bumblebee trademark was firmly back in Hasbro's hands, ready for the obscene amount of merchandise that came out in the wake of that film. Now, this might seem like an overly long, bizarrely detailed YouTube video about an inconsequential story about a tiny yellow plastic car, but the effects of Bumblebee Gate are still felt today. The retro boom of the early millennium kicked off this industry of mining nostalgia for grown-ass adult men everywhere, and this in turn has made trademark enforcement suddenly a very important subject to these big companies. Now you might wonder, who asked for all these 6-inch figures of Star Wars characters from all the old Marvel comics? Now think about this. This is just as likely to be done as a loss leader so that Disney can prove that they still own and are enforcing their trademarks, no matter how obscure. Because God's forbid that Jackson slips through the mouse's greasy grip. Merchandise and apparel too has just exploded over recent years. When I was growing up, you couldn't get a Spider-Man t-shirt in an adult size, but these days it is absolutely invaluable to expand a trademark's value as far as you can. If Hasbro can secure the Bumblebee trademark on clothing, drinkware, bed sheets, whatever, then this just prevents somebody else from moving into that space and taking the name. It helps them to shore up their brand ownership, it reduces the risk of competition, and it helps them to defend their very, very valuable trademarks. If you've ever walked down the aisles in a toy shop or the toy aisle in a supermarket, you've probably noticed that the toy packaging doesn't say things like Black Cat or Jazz, it says things like Marvel's Black Cat or Autobot Jazz. This is because Hasbro learned that hard lesson. Bumblebee is just a bit too generic. So this is them making the terms easier to trademark. It's why Warhammer paint now has all these weird names. It makes it simultaneously easier to register a trademark and easier to sue their competitors if they sell something that sounds too similar. Which is exactly what Hasbro did back in 2015 when they successfully sued Mattel for selling dolls and figures based on the DC Comics character of Bumblebee, despite the fact that DC's Bumblebee has existed for longer than Hasbro's. But Hasbro had that Bumblebee film on the horizon, and so they needed to make sure that they had an iron grip over that name. I think I'm going to end this one here, gang. Before this starts bumming me out too much about late capitalism and the slow and steady corporate murder of all joy in life. To end this video on a high note, just for fun, I like to imagine a world where Hasbro didn't win back the Bumblebee license, and their poster child ended up being Cliffjumper, voiced by The Rock, like he was in that Prime cartoon.
You want the horns? You got 'em.
That's the world I want to live in. Alright, I'll see you in the next one. Ta-da.